We have the capacity to make the invisible visible. I'm Doug Strycharczyk. I'm the CEO of AQR International. It's a business I founded in 1989, so I've been doing this now for nearly 34 years. Seems like a lifetime, and it is a lifetime. Before that, I had a pretty conventional career. I was the head of HR for Castrol, for the operations division of Castrol for a while. It was a fantastic job, and I learned such a lot in that job. I tended to work before that in big blue chips, people like Goodyear, Wedgwood, an organisation that people have forgotten about called United Drapery Stores that employed tens of thousands of people in the UK, but it's long gone. And the advantage of working for some of these big companies is I got really, really good training. I got an excellent training, and that stood me in good stead, but it made me think about what I was learning and also made me question a lot of what I was learning. So I'll give you a little example.
Okay.
Right at the outset. My very first training course I ever attended was at Rutherford College, which is now Northumbria University, and I went on a leadership and management programme, and I was taught about scientific management that had been expounded by an American called F.W. Taylor, and it was the dominant theory of its day.
Taylorism.
Yeah, and the idea was if you could specify what needed to be done and you told somebody very clearly what needed to be done, and that's where the early job descriptions used to come from, then it was an issue of obedience. People had to obey your instructions, and the clearer you can make your instructions, the more likely you were going to get a response. Now think of that. I was taught that about 50 years ago, and does anybody believe that now? That's long gone. Well, initially, the aim of the organisation was to provide consultancy services to senior leadership teams, because that's what I'd been doing with Castrol to a great extent, and very successfully, I would say. And the business took off. And I suppose we were very successful in the first 7 or 8 years of our existence. We went from nothing to at one point employing about 30 people in this building, and that created its own problems. It's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to manage a big team of people. I wanted to make a difference. And the other thing that happened is I began to realise that we were coming across the same issues, same problems everywhere we went. Every organisation we went to thought that their issues were unique to them, or this had only ever happened to them, or their problems had only arisen for them. But actually, when you did your kind of SWOT analysis and your diagnostic work, you tended to end up with the same picture, or a very similar picture. And so we began to realise maybe there was a way of bottling that and doing something with that and making the whole consultancy process a lot more efficient. And that began to slowly move us towards looking at tools and techniques. And then I suppose the big moment is we recruited a young psychologist called Peter Clough. Brilliant consultant for us, but his interest was at that time in academia. So he went off to the University of Hull, quickly became deputy head of psychology, but his interest was something called mental toughness. It got me interested in it. At first I didn't relate to it. I couldn't really get what he was talking about, largely because he was focused very much on sport.
Yeah.
But over a period of 8 years, I collaborated, worked with him, and bit by bit, together we began to understand this wasn't a sports concept, this was a general concept, and it mattered in all of our work. And so we came to a point in the early 2000s where we said, well, maybe we can develop this concept, develop products around it that we can then take to other consultancies and they can use in their work. And that's been largely what's happened. So our business is now to work with clients through partners. just done a podcast for somebody and they described it as my superpower. And in a way it is, because mental toughness is an aspect of your personality. It's an aspect we all know and have known for a long time is really important, but we've never really properly understood. The history of it, the first mention of it, goes back to Plato. Plato talks about fortitude, and when you look at what he talks about, it's exactly the same as what we talk about today. So mental toughness is an aspect of our personality that determines to a large extent, it's not the whole of the answer, how we respond mentally to things that happen to us and around us. Now that respond mentally bit is crucial, because when people talk about personality these days, 99% of the time they're talking about an aspect of personality. They don't realise it.
Yeah.
They're talking about behavioural aspects of personality. In other words, how I act when things happen. But how I act has to come from somewhere. And if we really want to change behaviour, we need to understand that. And the problem with mental aspects of personality is they're invisible. Behavioural aspects we can see. You know, we build assessment centres because we can see behaviour and we can assess behaviour. We don't build assessment centres to look at our mental approaches because we can't see what's going on inside our head. But Peter has sort of diligently approached the subject. He's built on the work of other people, and he's managed to get to the nub of what mental toughness is. And he found that it consisted of 4 core components. That was control, commitment, challenge and confidence. And at that point we said, we've got something we can offer the world. Our mental toughness, that mental capability, it's not about being tough or macho, it's about being tough in the resilient sense of the word, being able to deal with stress, pressure, challenge, opportunity. Those exist for almost all of us. In fact, if you want to describe life, you describe it in terms of those 4 characteristics. But some people operate in environments where these really matter. So like the police world is full of these things. And so it is for people in leadership roles. When you get to that level of an organisation, you tend to be dealing with stressors and pressures that most of the rest of us don't have. A big part of leadership is, leadership is about engaging with people, about having a clear purpose, about building a culture in an organisation. But these are tough things to do. And it requires a particular quality to be able to do that reliably and consistently. And that's where mental toughness fits. If you can deal with those stresses and pressures, then you have a better chance of being a more effective leader. But there's also another aspect to it. You know, if a leader wants to build a culture, in a sense they've also got to be the role model for the culture. So if you want to build a resilient and positive culture in an organisation, you tend to have to demonstrate that yourself. We've been able to articulate it now beyond those 4 components, the 4 C's. We now know that there are 8 factors. We know that within each of us, we have different profiles. In fact, there are just over 40,000 different combinations of those profiles. And that's telling us that we can now get down to treating people as an individual and not one size fits all, which has been, a problem with
that has been part of the problem, hasn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You have to be this kind of leader, or this type of leader, or this colour of leader. We have to get past that. Each leader is individual. Each one brings what they bring to an organisation. And when you combine leaders, you have a leadership team, you need to understand how those things combine as well.
So you mentioned there obviously the 4 elements, but then subdividing those out. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay, so the 8 factors, and this should interest most people. The original work on the 4 C's was largely driven by academics. The development of the 8 factors has been predominantly driven by practitioners. So we took the model out in a basic form, the MTQ 48, and people started using it. And then people started coming back to us with questions saying, well, I've used it, it says this, but this is what I'm seeing. And so we had to sort of go through a learning process ourselves, and we still are doing it. And one of the consequences of that is we found that the 4 C's, the 4 components, broke into 8 factors. Those are, as quickly as I can do it, life control. This is where the sense of self-worth sits. And what this is describing is whether you have a sense of can-do or not. You can have 2 people who are identical to each other in every way. You give them something to do, and one will think, yeah, I can do it. The other one will think, I can't. It's a mental thing. Second one is emotional control. And that's not about controlling emotions. It's about managing your emotions. So when things happen to us, we have an emotional reaction. It's not always useful to reveal that emotional reaction, but sometimes it's useful to channel that emotional reaction. Some of us can do it, some of us can't. And then we move around to the second C, and that's commitment. And this is where practitioners have been really, really important. There are 2 elements to that, goal orientation and achievement orientation. And goal orientation is, do you have a sense of purpose? In a sense, it's about visualizing. If you're going to do something, do you understand why you want to do it? Do you have a sense of purpose? Because if you can visualize what you're supposed to be doing, it should be a source of motivation. Achievement orientation is the other factor, because what we found is some people, to put it bluntly, can talk a good job. They do know what they're supposed to be doing, then don't go and do it because they can't be bothered to make the effort. And so achievement orientation is, are you sufficiently motivated to go and do what it takes to achieve it? And again, that's a form of visualization, because what you need to do there is visualize what success will look like and feel in your mind what it looks like. If you can do that, then you want it. If you can't do that, then you don't make the effort. And then we move around, and the challenge construct breaks into 2 qualities. And for me, this is the most exciting bit of the journey. The first one is risk orientation. And risk orientation describes, I suppose it's bringing optimism into the picture. And that's when we see events around us, and they can be new, different, very challenging events, do we see the opportunity or do we see them as threats? It's a mindset difference.
Yeah.
But one of the things about risk orientation is you're inevitably going to make more mistakes than somebody who plays it safe. And what we learned, and this is very relevant to for leadership, because we spotted this with senior leaders. Senior leaders will be very good at saying, let's try something new. We're launching a new initiative in this organisation. And then it doesn't work. And you go into the organisation and say, well, what about trying this? And they say, didn't work, we binned it. And you say, well, what did you learn from it? Nothing, we binned it. So some people learn from everything that happens to them.
Yeah.
They're reflective. Other people don't. They just want to go past it, forget about it, and they move on. They tend to repeat their mistakes. I call the learning orientation piece the beating heart of the whole concept. Because research shows, there's research at the University of Western Ontario that shows our mental toughness is roughly 50% genetic and 50% learned. So that's the old nature and nurture thing. And so if we've learned a big chunk of our mental toughness, we can unlearn it and relearn it. And then the last piece, which is what Professor Clough, or Peter Clough, added, was the confidence bit. And it's amazing that this was overlooked by most of the researchers. And he found there was 2 elements. One was having confidence in your abilities. And this is a curious one, because what we often find is lots of people have abilities, they know things, they've got skills, and yet they'll still doubt themselves. If they doubt themselves, they don't use them. And quite often, if they're working with others, they will think, so-and-so's got more skills than me, better at this than me, and they're not. And so they back off, they don't use their skills. So it's one thing to have abilities, it's another thing to believe in your abilities and use them. And then the last component is interpersonal confidence. And we thought at once that was about being assertive. It's much more about, are you prepared to engage with other people? And you engage with other people for several reasons. One is to influence them. Second, to be heard. But the third one sort of loops back to the learning orientation bit, how else are you going to learn? You know, just picking up a modern day challenge with the tendency to work from home. I wonder how young people learn from their peers. Because I know when I started working, I learned from the people around me. But if they're not around me, where do I learn? So, you know, interpersonal confidence means some people are happy to go and engage with anyone. They don't care that they might ask a stupid question, because the minute they've asked the question and got the answer, they're no longer stupid. Whereas other people will back off. You know, they don't want to ask that stupid question, or they're worried that somebody else might react in an odd way. So those are the 8 factors. That is a really, really great question. It's a very important question, Andy, because, you know, when you look at the origins, or the recent origins of the concept, it came out of the world of sport, and mental toughness was very strongly associated with winning. So the more mentally tough you are, the more likely you are to win. And that's what all the research showed. As we've worked with the concept over the last 20 odd years, what we've begun to understand is the mentally tough can often fail, and the mentally sensitive can often succeed. So the question is why? And the key to that is self-awareness. So I'll give an example of why a mentally tough person might fail. So the kind of person that gets to the top of an organisation or into a successful position is often somebody with a high sense of life control, that strong sense of can-do. So I've got a project, I'll give it to you, will you have a go? And the answer will be, yeah, of course I will. Now, is that a strength? Yes, it's a strength. Most people would see that as a strength. Then you say, well, if I ask this person to have a go at 10 different projects, and realistically they can only handle 3, will they still say yes? And they will. They'll try to have a go at everything, even things they can't succeed at. So is this a strength? Well, no, it's a weakness. Just a minute, we just described this as a strength. So what we're beginning to understand is it's not about being strong or weak. It's much more about advantage and disadvantage. So in one setting, having that level of life control is an advantage. In another setting, it's a disadvantage. And so what we need to understand is a setting and say, to what extent is my approach to things an advantage or disadvantage? And the balance will determine whether it's a strength or a weakness. So we're not very fond of strength-based models because they talk about strengths being intrinsic. They're not, they're extrinsic. So similarly, at the other end, a mentally sensitive person, if you ask that person to take on a difficult job, they'll hesitate and they might say no. And you think, wimp. However, if you're now faced with something very challenging, very complex and very risky, that person's approach might be right. That person might be saying, no, I want to know more before I do anything. And the problem is that the mentally tough person might not listen to the mentally sensitive person. So, and that's true about every component in the mental toughness profile. And the consequence of that is we know that very few people are mentally tough on all 8 factors, are mentally sensitive on all 8 factors. They're actually a mix. And the challenge for each of us is to identify where our areas of mental sensitivities lie and learn how to deal with that, and where our areas of mental toughness lie and learn how to optimize that. And so we now understand that mental toughness is not necessarily good. Mental sensitivity is not necessarily bad. It's understanding who you are and making the most of who you are that matters. I suppose for the last 34 years, I've been on a mission, but especially for the last 20 odd years, last 28 years that I've been involved with the mental toughness concept. At one level, I do think we've found something that's missing and that it's really, really valuable. And I want to try and get it out to people. So that's my purpose. I have a purpose. And if you think about in terms of the mental toughness concept, that's my purpose. It motivates me. And will I make the effort to achieve that purpose? Well, I think so. So in 2002, we did describe ourselves as an international organisation. But that just meant we went to Ireland every now and again, which, as you know, is only about an hour and a half by hydrofoil from here. We now work in over 80 countries. And I've visited and worked in 46 of them. That's a lot of effort. And sometimes it has felt like an effort, but it's what keeps you going. You know that you've got something that is valuable for other people. They don't always listen, and they don't often let go of what they already know. But, you know, I'm on a mission to try and get people to understand what we've got, to adopt it, to use it, and to make a difference in the world that they operate in. And again, the magic thing is we work in education at every level. You know, Tony, my colleague, has been working with Year 6 students who are preparing to go to big school. Mental toughness is an issue for those kids. It'll affect them. We work in higher education. We're looking at student dropout, student retention, student employability. We work in business, at every aspect of business, and especially coaching. We've got big presence in coaching. Every major coaching professional body supports us. And then we work in sport, and that funny enough, is growing all the time. We work in health, especially around mental health and well-being. Some very big programs around that. And then there's other things. We're constantly surprised by what's happening. I'll give you a little example. We're working with a group of people in the Middle East who've been working with children who've got leukemia. Those children obviously have parents, and the parents are extremely worried about their children. And so they wanted to kind of understand how they could help the parents approach the situation better mentally. So they took the mental toughness concept, measured the responses of the people, and began to introduce interventions that helped them. And they did. It worked. It made a big difference. And then they found that because they'd helped the parents to manage the situation better, that was spilling over to the children. The children were responding better. And then what they found was, as the children responded better, their response to the treatment improved. For me, I get goosepimples just thinking about it. And I'm thinking, 34 years ago, that is not what I thought I'd be doing. And so every day for me is a surprise. And it's mostly a pleasant surprise. And so, you know, I wake up every day and I think, what are we going to be doing today?